We were sorry to leave Isfahan after only a few days, but on such a journey any disappointment is offset by the promise of further adventure along the trail. Once again we headed eastwards, this time through the desert of southern Iran. We passed over a mountain range and then entered the Dashalut, or Great Sands Desert as it is known in English. We stopped at Yazda for lunch and then drove until dusk, when we stopped to free camp in the empty desert. A long drive the next day was punctuated only by a stop at Bam, where we explored some restorations of the ancient ruined city. This is the desert lighthouse at Bam, that once guided camel trains across this part of the famous Silk Route between east and west. That evening we prepared ourselves for another night out in the desert, but we arrived at a Marples Ridgeway road camp, where we were allowed to stay the night and enjoy their swimming pool showers and restaurant. The workers at the camp were working on surfacing the scrape road up to the border with Pakistan. The next day's driving was rather dusty, to say the least. The first stage took us to Zahedan, the last town before the border crossing to Pakistan, but it was still another 95 miles of thick dust before we reached the actual border post. From the border we continued eastwards through the desert. It was mile after mile of nothing but scrub, although sometimes we saw desert Bedouins. It was a long hot drive over an atrocious road to the tiny town of Nukundi, where we camped the night in the courtyard of a building laughingly described as a tourist information office. The next day's drive was much the same, with the road being so poor in some places that we drove off it and into the desert for a welcome break from the potholes. That evening we arrived at another small town called Nushki, where we set up camp and were stoned by local boys as we prepared our evening meal. We chased the boys away to the obvious dislike of the locals, but experienced no further trouble. The next day we reached Quetta, and the comparative comfort of camping on the lawns of the Lourdes Hotel. There was quite a queue for the one shower, and clothes were handed over to the Dhobi wallahs to be cleaned of all the dust. Quetta is an isolated outpost in northwestern Pakistan, and was fairly unspoilt at this time. It was fascinating to explore the old town, and observe the local tribesmen openly carrying their rifles around in defiance of the law. The couple of days break in Quetta was welcome, but alas, some of us ate out at a restaurant and got food poisoning the day before we left. Our intended route took us north into Afghanistan to Kabul, and then on through the famous Khyber Pass, but the Afghan border had been closed due to the troubles there. So we had to turn south instead and travel down to Sukker, where we could cross the mighty Indus River before continuing east towards India. It was back into the desert for the first part of the journey south. Rivers fed by melting snow were completely dry at that time of the year and provided several shortcuts. When we did find less arid terrain, we still had reminders that there was danger all along this part of our route. It was another long hot drive that day, and by the time that we reached the town of Sukker, those of us with food poisoning were quite dehydrated. We camped on the lawns of the circuit judge's rest house, but my memory of Sukker is of the tiny cafe that sold cold drinks.